My name is Brian Lauer, and it is an honor and a privilege to be here tonight at St. Cloud State. And I just want to thank you all for coming. You could be doing anything tonight, but you're here. You know, it's midterms, you could be studying, taking a study break, you could be playing, working, stuff like that. But you're here, and I just want to tip my hat to you. And I think that's very commendable. And we're going to make the most efficient use of time is we're going to do some dialogue at the beginning, and then we're going to we'll give some presentation, then we'll have Q&A at the end. And basically, I'm just going to talk to you like I wish somebody would have talked to me when I was in your shoes. Because I was in your shoes at one time. I walked these sidewalks, went to the classes, listened to the professors, ate at Garvey, did the projects and the papers and the midterms and the finals, been there, done that. And the thing that really stuck with me this whole time, 20-some years, is I was in Social Science 104 in Stewart Hall, and the professor's talking about Lucy. You guys have heard about Lucy, the supposed ancestor? Okay. And I raised my hand and I said, what difference does it make? We're here, we're now, who cares? I actually said that. And I talk to people today that say that. And I understand, because I've been in those shoes, right? I understand the thought process. And the professor said, well, it makes a difference to some people. And so I thought, well, I'm not some people, on with life. And so I never gave it another thought until about 10 or 15 years later, it occurred to me that that was the most important question I asked in college. What difference does it make? It makes a lot of difference, really. And that's why we're doing Who's Your Daddy? Basically, how did you get here? And now is where we're going to open it up. This is the discussion time. Where do you believe you came from? We're not talking hypothetical. You yourself, where did your ancestors, well, how do you think you got here? Anybody can volunteer.
East Africa.
You came from East Africa, all right? What were you in East Africa?
It was before I was born.
Right, but what were your ancestors in East Africa?
Early man.
Early man, all right? Anybody have any other idea of how we got here? Personally? Anybody? Pastor?
Created.
Created. By who?
God.
God created what?
Everything.
Okay, but as far as humans go?
Oh, Adam, Eve.
Okay, so God created man.
Yep.
All right. Do we have any other options? You either believe you were early man or created. Is that it? There's other flavors out there, you know. Yes?
I guess some say come from bacteria or something, just evolved.
Bacteria?
Yeah.
Well, that would be... Would you go along with that, Paul, that the early man came from bacteria?
Some life form, yeah.
Some life form. Simple. A simpler life form. Okay. Would that be all right? We'll just put simple. All right, simpler. Is that it? Do we have it all covered? Does anybody believe you came from something else? Either claim you came from a simple life form or you were created by God. Is that it? Because if you had a Richard Dawkins in here, he would say that this came from aliens. Aliens came here. Do we have anybody in that camp? Okay, nobody in that camp? There's some people that say God created something that evolved. The theistic evolutions, okay? God created something, but it wasn't human, all right? So basically, this is still evolution, okay? So basically what you have is you were created or you evolved. That's pretty much the two options. So now this is what you believe. Let's talk about why you believe it. Why do you believe you came from early man?
Science.
What part of science? What did science show you that caused you to believe you came from early man?
The science of how we came to be the early hominids that show that we evolved from them, from early primates.
So the bones you're talking about? The bones. That went from like smaller to bigger? Or ape-like to
How we
human-like?
evolved through our natural selection and mutation, yeah.
Natural selection and mutation, okay?
Variation between everything.
Now think about that. Mutations. Do we like to have mutations? Do you want to have a mutated child?
Well, when you say it like that, no one wants to have that,
No.
but everyone has mutations, whether
Right.
it be good or bad.
Right, but the majority of them are bad. The majority of them are lethal. And dead things don't reproduce. Okay, so what we have here is a natural selector. You say, okay, can you show me the selector? Natural selection, can you show me the selector?
Environment.
The environment. Does it have a brain?
No.
No, no, okay. And this is basically what we got. So I guess I'll ask, where did those early humans come from? Anybody?
Primates.
What?
Primates.
Primates, okay. Where did the primates come from?
Mammal.
Metal?
Mammal.
Mammals, okay. Where did the mammals come from? Anybody?
We keep going back. How far back do you want to go, Brian?
As far as it takes.
Back to the simple life form.
Okay, so we got, would you say, a lot of places, like if you look at geological, and you'd have reptiles, would you go along with that? Mammals came from reptiles?
No.
What would you say, where'd they come from?
Well, we can trace them back to fish-type creatures.
Fish-type creatures, okay. So the mammals came from fish. Did they have lungs or gills?
They had lungs and then they had gills.
They had lungs and then
We're
they
going
had
backwards.
gills.
We're going backwards.
Right, okay. Do we know what a fossil has as far as lungs or gills?
Some.
Some. The soft tissue. Okay, so where did the fish come from?
Simpler life form.
Simpler. It keeps going simpler. All the way down to the first living cell, right? The very first living cell is supposed to give everything, all the plants and animals and people we see today. What's your best evidence for that?
Fossil record.
The fossil record.
Geological record.
The geologic record. What in the fossil record?
Fossil.
Fossils. Okay, the bones in the dirt prove that we came from a single living cell. Is that what you're telling me?
Oh, did it say proof?
Genomics.
What?
Genomics.
Genomics. That's where we came from. Well, see, what we're going to talk about is there's two ways of looking at things. What you believe determines what you see. I have this fossil right here. Who thinks this shows millions of years? It's a clam in a closed position. See, the fossils typically, index fossils, millions of years, they date the layers of the rock. Okay. I look at this and this is a flood. This is a sign of a flood. See, what I believe determines what I see, and what you believe determines what you see. If you believe in millions of years, you're going to try and squeeze everything into millions of years. If you believe in creation, you're going to see something differently. That's kind of what we're going to talk about tonight. Which one makes the most sense? Okay? Is it molecules to man? And when I talk about evolution, I'm talking about molecules to man. Okay, has anybody ever seen this before? The chalkboard says, and then a miracle occurs, and then somebody says, I think you should be a little more explicit here in step 2. You've seen that before? Okay. Now, how many people think that's an evolutionist talking to a creationist? Nobody? How many think it's a creationist talking to an evolutionist? Okay, so we're going to talk about that. See, when I was growing up, I was pretty confused. I heard about the Big Bang and the Garden of Eden and ape-like ancestors and Noah's Ark and dinosaurs, and it didn't make any sense to me. And what I realized is, hey, we're not putting one puzzle together here, we're putting two puzzles together here. The main thing you need to do is separate them. Well, how do you separate them? Some are based on God's word and some are based on man's word. You separate the pieces, they fit perfectly. Now you just got to figure out which one's true and which one's false. And how do you do that? Which one reflects reality? Which one makes sense of what we see today? Like I was talking before. It's the same fossil, it's the same hardware. The thing that's different is the software. Why don't we agree if we got the same fossils? It's because we have different beliefs about the past, different beliefs about the future, and different beliefs about God. All right, now if you go home and you look underneath your car, how many people think that this evolved? You think it evolved?
Yeah, over time, mechanics has made it better. That's evolving.
Okay, now remember when I say evolved, that's molecules to man. Undirected, godless.
You can't just
no.
use the word evolving just in that sense.
Okay, but we're talking with life. Did this get put together by itself or did somebody put it together?
It's not living, it's metal.
It's metal. I agree. I was at St. Cloud, or I was at the vocational school yesterday too, and I asked somebody else in the discussion. And this woman said, I asked her, do you think the car evolved? And she said what you said. And I said, well, that's equivocation. We've changed the meaning. She said, small changes over time. And I said, yeah, but we were talking molecules to man. Was this undirected small changes over time, or was it directed? Was there an intelligence behind these changes? And she said, there was intelligence. And we had a 5-minute conversation, and she walks away, and a student comes up to me, she goes, "Do you know who you were talking to?" And I said, "No." She goes, "It was the biggest, baddest atheist here, professor on campus." "Oh, okay." And so, but she goes, "Yeah, and I was texting my friends while you were talking to her, you were kicking her butt." But, okay, so this did not evolve. What does this have that says it doesn't evolve? It's got precision fit, multiple parts working together for a purpose with precision timing, right? Multiple parts working together, precision timing, that shows design, that shows intelligence. Would you agree? Would everybody agree on that? Okay, all right. Well, how about this? The Blue Angels. Multiple pieces working together for a purpose, precision timing. Does anybody in the room think that this evolved? And I'm talking undirected, natural, undirected processes put this together. Doesn't. Okay, how about the space shuttle? This is probably the most complicated piece of machinery man ever made, the space shuttle. Okay?
This is very unrelated to life. This is not something living.
You're right, it's not. But do you see the signs of design?
Well, yeah, because somebody else made it. It's not like it's evolving on its own. It's not like the metal can form to something else. It's not living. It doesn't have bacteria. It doesn't have DNA. It doesn't have the things to live. It's not. We're not talking about this. We're talking about evolution of creationism versus evolution. This is not.
Okay, and I take your point. I understand your point. We'll have Q&A at the end. All right?
I understand the question.
Okay, yeah. See, we're getting into changes. We'll just say undirected processes. Did undirected processes put this together?
No, this was intelligently designed.
Intelligently designed. How about that?
No.
Why not?
Why was that not intelligently designed?
Yes.
The appearance of design
Yes.
does not mean it was designed by an entity.
The appearance of design does not mean that it was designed. Is that what you're
This
telling me?
particular life form has evolved to exploit a certain environment.
Okay, and we'll talk on that. Okay, we just went from a lot of people. This thing has multiple parts working together with a purpose, with precision timing.
With a purpose.
Oh, it sure does. It flies. It's flying. That's a purpose, and that's not easy. A Boeing 747 has 4.5 million parts working together, and none of those parts fly. They all work together for a purpose. One of your living cells has billions of parts working together. This living cell makes that space shuttle look like a tinker toy. Now, if that tinker toy couldn't get put together by chance, what makes you think that can get put together by chance? And just to show you how complicated your cells are, let's just take a look and see what's happening inside your cell. It's more than just material. There's information, and that information has to be very specific.
In 1957, Francis Crick first proposed that chemicals called bases along the spine of the DNA molecule function as alphabetic characters in a written language or digital characters in a machine code. This animation shows how this digital information directs protein synthesis. First, a large protein complex separates the tightly wound strands of the DNA to prepare it to be copied. During this process of transcription, a protein complex called a polymerase produces a single-stranded copy of the original instructions. Here we see this copy, a messenger RNA molecule, being constructed inside the polymerase as individual bases are positioned and added to the growing strand. Now we see the polymerase in action from the outside as it spits out the messenger RNA transcript. Next, this RNA transcript approaches and passes through a molecular machine called the nuclear pore complex, an information recognition device that controls the flow of information in and out of the cell's nucleus. Now we see the genetic assembly instructions on the messenger RNA approaching and arriving at a two-part chemical factory called a ribosome, the site of protein synthesis. As the messenger RNA transcript passes through the ribosome, the process of translation begins. During translation, a mechanical assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids in accord with the instructions on the transcript. These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell by molecules called transfer RNAs, which link specific sequences of bases to corresponding amino acids. The sequential arrangement of the amino acids determines the type of protein constructed. When the construction of the chain is complete, it is transported to a barrel-shaped machine that helps fold it into the precise shape required to perform its function. After the chain is folded into a protein, it is released into the outer cytoplasm to do its job in the cell.
There's more to life than just chemicals. There's instruction, there's information. How does that happen? It's happening 1 trillion times over in your cell, or in your bodies. 100 trillion times that's happening. Is that just going to happen by chance? And those amino acids that they're putting together, they can form in 2 different ways. It's called chirality, all right? There's a left-handed one and a right-handed one. When they do it in a laboratory, it's 50-50 mix. When it's in a human being, it's 100% left-handed, 100%. And when you die, it goes back to 50-50 mix. There's something to life. You know what death is? Death is just chemistry over biology. Chemistry is victory over biology. If the chemicals in our body did what they normally do, we go back to the dust. But there's something in our life that keeps them from doing that. We're alive. Okay, so if you don't think that who thinks that this was created? Who thinks that this was evolved? Okay? Then this is what you believe, really. It's what they tell us. Don't be absurd. Nobody made us. We evolved by chance from snowflakes. All right? Snow is not alive, but the cell is a lot more complicated than snow. I mean, that has the appearance of design, but it's obvious it was made. How much more so our body? And yet, when we look in our textbooks, do we think that life evolved? Do we think that science has it all worked out? I talk to people, yeah, science has it all worked out. Well, let's just look down here. This is your textbook you use here in college. It's talking about how it's too hot for life in the previous paragraphs. It's talking about how there's no ozone up there to protect us from this harsh sun. Okay, somehow life evolved. That's what they're teaching in your classrooms. They have no idea how life happened. Okay? And if you don't have life, how is it going to evolve? And this is when I think it's a creationist talking to an evolutionist. I think they should be a little more specific in that paragraph. Somehow. They just went from a galaxy of non-life to a galaxy of life, and they went light years without any. Just somehow it happened. And you need to watch out for these fuzzy words. Watch out. Then it evolved. And that's what they teach kids in grade school, too. They tell them that life can only come from non-life. Or the principle of biogenesis, which states that all living things come from other living things, seems reasonable to us today. They taught spontaneous generation for 2,000 years. That's where they say, if you want to make maggots, just put some meat on the ground, meat on the table. You'll create life, called maggots. If you want to make mice, just throw some grain and dirty rags in the corner, you'll make mice. That's what they taught for thousands of years. That was the dogma until Louis Pasteur devised some experiments and proved it wrong. Spontaneous generation does not work. They tell them in the beginning, life only comes from life. And then afterwards, they say life only comes from non-life. And I want you to watch for fuzzy words. It's like appear, theorize, could have happened. Although lacking direct evidence, that's a fuzzy. The first cell, scientists make some inferences. Many scientists think. See, no evidence. And then things, the second oldest fossils that are thought to be. Okay, and the first cells might have developed. Thus the cells were probably. So if you ever find a fuzzy word, and that's what it is, just cross it out. That's not science. I'm talking about science as observation and testing, not beliefs about the past. That's a religion. Science is observation and testing. That's what brings us technology, the space shuttle, automobiles, your cell phone, observation and testing. Beliefs about the past have nothing to do with it. And this is human biology. These are the words in your human biology book. Do not know, as best as we can surmise, new cells evolved, the best estimates apparently evolved. It appears the story of origins, and that's what it is. It is a story. Most likely, in all likelihood, thought to be, apparently arose, were probably, apparently, it is possible. Some researchers assign. By no means certain. Some scientists speculate. Some researchers speculate. See how it's just full. It's just coming off these pages. There's no evidence for any of that at all. And that's just in 12 pages. This is my favorite one. When you look at this, it says, because oxygen is highly reactive and would have broken down the organic molecules as they formed. Okay, so they couldn't have oxygen before life came because oxygen would break it down. And yet you can't have life without oxygen because there's no ozone and the sun's radiation is going to break it down. So this is what they say. Our best guess is that single-stranded self-replicating RNA first formed on templates of clay. Notice we're not getting formed in a prebiotic soup anymore. That's what I learned with growing up. Because water breaks down molecules faster than it puts them together. They call it hydrosis. So again, this is where another time when you could ask the same question. That's a miracle. See, everybody believes in miracles. A miracle is something that happens contrary to laws of science. Life coming from non-life contradicts science. Matter from nothing contradicts science. Something turning into everything else contradicts a lot of science. So everybody has a belief system. The question is, what's your belief system based on? Is it based on what man says, who's been wrong before, who doesn't know everything? Or is it based on what God says, who does know everything and is never wrong? All right. And they tried, if you want to make $1 million, you guys can still do it. Oh no, they took this off the table. If you could figure out how DNA grows spontaneously, you could make $1 million. Nobody could do it. It was on the table for a dozen years. They finally took it off because it's not happening. They show these kids this Miller-Urey experiment and say, yeah, it makes amino acids. Those are the building blocks of life. Yeah, that's like saying, hey, see this lug nut? It's a building block of a car. There's a whole lot more to amino acids. And we talked about the chirality before. Life is a lot more complicated than just the matter. You know, if you could take the chemistry of this paper and the chemistry of this ink, would that give you any clue about what the message was? No, not at all. Just because you know the material part doesn't mean you know the informational part. And this, and I was talking to that woman yesterday, and I said, well, do you believe scientific journals? Well, it depends. Well, this is what one of Scientific American says. Psst, don't tell the creationists, but scientists don't have a clue how life began. Don't have a clue. And why is that? Because DNA can make neither proteins nor copies of itself without the help of a catalyst protein called enzymes. This fact turned the origin of life into a classic chicken or egg. Which one came first, the proteins or the DNA? See, the DNA makes the proteins and the proteins made of DNA. How do you do that? And then they go on to say that the RNA world, which our textbook talked about, hypothesis remains problematic. I mean, RNA is so unstable. And it's the components are difficult to synthesize under the best of circumstances in a library, let alone under possible prebiotic conditions. The RNA world is so dissatisfying that some frustrated scientists are resorting to much more far-out, literally, speculation. Speculation, that word's going to come up again. Speculation. And this is Scientific American. This isn't me talking. This is what they're writing in the journals. All right? And it says, dissatisfied with the conventional theories of life's beginnings, Crick conjectured that aliens came to Earth in spaceship and planted the seeds of life on here. Aliens. So the question is, Mr. Crick, how did the life evolve? If it couldn't evolve here, how did it evolve there? Oh, maybe it was aliens there. Well, how did it evolve there? You need alien every time. Okay, and Crick, he was a co-discoverer of the DNA. He saw how complicated that was. And so he knows. He said, hey, it didn't evolve. There's no way. So he comes up with a fantasy of aliens. Okay? Of course, panspermia, that's what he calls it. Theories merely push the problem of life's origin into outer space. If it didn't begin here, how did it begin out there? And this one guy, he wanted to talk about intelligent design. The signs for intelligence are everywhere. Okay, and he put it in he's an editor for the Smithsonian, and he put it in the journal, and he got fired. They say, well, why don't you have anything in the peer-reviewed journals? Because you put it in there, you get fired. Why do all the scientists believe in evolution? Because if you don't, you get fired. So let's take a look at what's inside your cell. I mean, something has to power us. And as you're watching it, think about multiple parts working together with precision timing. This is multiple parts working together with precision timing.
It's been called one of the wonders of the molecular world, an amazing nanoscale machine. ATP synthase is a high-tech micromolecular power generator inside the cells of your body. It generates adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, an energy molecule that provides fuel that every one of your cells needs to function. Without this fuel, your cells will cease operation, and so will you. ATP synthase works like a rotary engine. The barrel-shaped rotator is composed of 10 to 15 protein parts called subunits. The rotator spins around, transmitting mechanical energy into the drive shaft of the machine, which helps make ATP. This drive shaft has a specially placed bump that opens and closes parts as the drive shaft spins around. This bump opens special protein subunits on the bottom of the machine. When the bottom subunits open, a spent energy molecule called adenosine diphosphate, or ADP, enters the machine. The mechanical motion causes the ADP to bind with an additional phosphate group, creating the ATP energy molecule. And the ATP drifts off into the cell, ready to power some biomechanical reaction. The ATP synthase machine has many parts we recognize from human-designed technology. A rotor, a stator, a drive shaft, and other basic components of a rotary engine. The ATP synthase is one of thousands of elegantly designed molecular machines inside your cells that make your life and all known life possible. ATP synthase. An example of intelligent design.
Intelligent design. Do you see this? The rotors and the drive shafts, do you see all that we design today for our cars and our motors? Who thinks that came together by chance? Chance random processes? You think that came together by chance? You don't see intelligence behind that at all? All right. How about this? RNA splicing. They're all doing what they need to do, multiple parts working together with precision timing. When Darwin came up with his theory, he thought the cell was about as complicated as a ping pong ball. And he thought, no, the more we figure it out, the more we know, the more it'll make sense, the more we'll figure out how it evolved. Well, we know more now, and we really don't know how it evolved. Remember, scientists don't have a clue how life began. And this person, she brought it up in one of her slideshows to her class. She mentioned intelligent design. One of her students got all hot and bothered about it and went to her boss and said she's teaching creation. And she said, she's teaching religion. She said, I'm not teaching religion. She said, all they did was mention intelligent design. And what they do? They eliminated her job, and now she's blackballed. She used to get the job on the spot when she'd interview. Now she's having a hard time getting it because she questions evolution. And this is Dr. Charles McCombs. He's got a PhD in organic chemistry from UCLA and a BS in chemistry, so he knows chemistry, okay? And he's worked for a research place, and he had 26 research patents, so he understands chemicals. Now this is what he says. He says, he writes this article, evolutionists hope you don't know chemistry, the problem with chirality. And we talked about that, how you got the left hand and the right hand. You know, the amino acids and proteins are all left-handed, okay? And it's, oh yeah, while the RNA and the DNA are all right-handed, 100%. You got billions of DNA molecules, and they're all right-handed. And you can't even get one molecule. It isn't, now this is what he's saying. He's got a master's in chemistry, okay? It is impossible for one nucleotide to be formed with chirality. How much more likely would it be for billions of nucleotides to come together exactly at the same time and all of them be formed with the same chirality? This is what he's saying. When we show them the laws of natural science cannot explain the science of chirality, evolutionists say that the process happened a long time ago by some unknown method. Remember, somehow life evolved? Something that cannot be explained. Now, who is relying on a supernatural explanation there? Somehow it happened. We can't, the laws of science say it can't happen, but somehow it did. And as the enzyme reads the sequence of molecules, oh, this is the DNA repair. For those who put their, and I talked to somebody too today, their best evidence for evolution was DNA. And I asked, well, how did DNA get here? They can't, because it doesn't form. And this is what the chemist says about DNA. As the enzyme reads the sequence of molecules along the strand, if an incorrect nucleotide is directed in the strand, there's a mechanism that uses other enzymes to cut out the bad nucleus and insert the correct one, repairing the DNA. Because your DNA gets ripped apart every day. There's millions of lesions, every day. How did the DNA survive without the DNA repair system? And how did the DNA repair system survive without the DNA? And he goes on to say, there is no mechanism to explain how DNA could exist for millions of years while the repair mechanism evolved. So we're crossing our fingers and hoping that it happened. Evolution can give you a theory that might, on the surface, seem possible. But when the science gets involved, remember, observation and testing, not belief systems about the past, observation and testing in the present. And the science gets involved and scientists start asking questions. The problems and false logic of the theory become apparent. This is why evolution just hopes you don't know chemistry. And this guy wasn't a creationist until he saw the chirality. And it's like, oh man, this didn't come together by chance. And people will say, well, there's so many billions of stars and so many billions of planets, we just got lucky here. The law of infinite probability. That's like if I give you a shotgun and blindfold you and say, how long is it going to take for you to hit the moon? You can shoot till the cows come home for billions of years, you're never going to hit the moon. I don't care what planet you're on. That's the same thing with life. And this is Gary Parker. He's one of my favorite. And I encourage you to go into Answers in Genesis and listen to his talk, Evolution versus Creation. Okay? Because he was an evolutionist. He taught at a Christian college. They were hiring him, and he says, I'm not a creationist. And they said, oh, that's fine. He wasn't even a Christian. He said, that's fine, just don't swear. So he had his biology class, and he was making the kids cry, making them doubt their faith, because he thought that it was his job to bring them into the 20th century. Evolution was very satisfying to me, he says. Did your faith in evolution affect your classroom teaching? And I was very conscious trying to get my students to bend their religious beliefs to evolution. Very conscious. And he would have people crying in his classroom. And he would also, and the ones that he was the hardest on the most were the theistic evolutionists. He was really hard on them. Because theirs didn't make sense theologically or scientifically. And what he says, he went back to, and it was interesting too, because they had a chemistry guy invited him for a Bible study, and he's like, why would I want to do that? And the guy says, oh, free coffee and donuts. Okay, I'll be there. So he went to the Bible study for 3 years because of coffee and donuts, 3 years, and he gave him his best arguments for every evolution, and he got beat for 3 years. And then he began to look at it himself and he said, hey, that makes sense. He started to teach it in his class, creation. And then the Bible department got mad at him. It's like, you can't teach that. Evolution is the way it is. So the Bible department challenged him to a debate, but they said, get some help because we don't want you to have the underdog mentality. So this biology teacher got the chemistry and another earth science one. And so it's the Bible department defending evolution and the science department defending creation. Think that through a bit. These guys are scientists. They got their degrees in science. And once they change their foundation, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. And that's what I'm asking you to do tonight. Just put on the other pair of glasses for a while. See if it makes sense. I used to play baseball with the kids on Saturday mornings, and these kids would show up and we'd play ball, and one time Will Grant, it's probably Ethan's size, he says, hey, Mr. Lauer, can I pitch? And the worst thing you can do is have somebody up there who can't pitch, because then the game stops. And so then I didn't want to tell him, no, you can't. I said, I don't know, can you? Get on the mound, hit my glove. And bam, 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 hit it 3 times. So, yeah, Grant, you can pitch, batter up. So that's what I'm asking you to do tonight. Just give creation a chance. Look at it from a biblical perspective. See if the evidence, and don't be looking for millions of years. Just give it a chance. Creationists make better predictions than the evolutionists, based on a 6,000-year model. And then he went to Gary Parker. He was able to go to grad school for geology, in biology and geology. And he thought, oh boy, this is where my faith's going to get shaken. And what did he learn in grad school? Now this is grad school. He learned that that professor presented paraconformities. Those are fossils that are in the wrong place. Like in the Grand Canyon, they've got two layers together and it's missing a layer. It's called a paraconformity, okay? He presented paraconformities as a real mystery and something very difficult to explain in evolutionary or uniformitarian processes terms. They can't explain those fossils. But in the flood model, they don't have to. It makes sense because those layers are not millions of years. And then he thought the fossils, he thought, oh boy, this is where I'm really going to struggle. He didn't have much courage. He thought, well, if the fossils don't line up with the Bible, then I'm just not going to tell people about it. But the more he learned about the fossils, he says, instead of challenging my creationist ideas, all the geology I learned in graduate school was supporting it. So before you guys, all I'm asking you to do is go into Answers in Genesis and listen to Gary Parker, Evolution and Creation. Just do that once. That's all I'm asking. Do your homework and see what happened to a creationist when he looked at the evidence. Because what he saw was, hey, shells stay shells. There's no millions of years here. Something millions of years old and something modern look identical. Somebody wrote a book about it. Yeah, it's called Living Fossils. And it's a book full of animals that did not evolve. And it's just, look at this. The horseshoe crabs have always been horseshoe crabs. It's called Living Fossils by Dr. Carl Werner. I invite you to check this out too. He's a medical doctor. And he got challenged to, hey, can you prove evolution wrong? Or prove it right? And he tried to prove it right. And actually he proved it wrong. He was an evolutionist, and the evidence showed him that creation was right. Because his theory was, hey, if evolution's true, the animals in the past should be, well, you don't prove it true, you falsify it. So his theory was, if evolution is false, the animals in the fossil record will be just like the ones that are alive today. And guess what he found? He found animals in the fossil record that were just like the ones that are alive today. So many of them were bigger. We're not getting better. All right? What's in the fossil record are animals that are alive or animals that are dead. There's no fossil anything. But the really interesting thing is scientists don't think they're the same animal. That's the scientific name for them, the genus and the species. They don't think that these are the same animals. Why is that? Because one's fossil and one's alive. Okay, so I encourage you to open your eyes, look at the evidence from there's really no neutral position, from a biblical position. And they said in one graduate class, the professor told us we didn't have to memorize the dates of geological systems since they were far too uncertain and conflicting. One of their assignments was to take a real life sample and date it, and they couldn't get the numbers to work. And the professor said, yeah, that's right, and it doesn't work. He said, don't let the creationists find out about this. So then in geophysics, we went over the assumptions, the assumptions that go into radiometric dating. Afterwards, the professor said something like this: if a fundamentalist ever got a hold of this stuff, he would make havoc out of the radiometric dating system. So keep the faith. Everybody has faith. I was talking to a guy at the kiosk, and he said, well, what makes the most sense? And I said, exactly. That you were created in the image of God, or that you evolved from hydrogen and helium. Hydrogen and helium and lithium, giving enough time, turns into people. Both of them are faith statements. I don't have enough faith to believe hydrogen and helium turn into people. That's a blind faith. The Bible says we were created in the image of God, and God was there. And it makes sense. And to make proteins, living creatures use a sequence of DNA bases, all right, to line up with a sequence of amino acids. So these bases and acids, they're supposed to react. But when you're alive, they don't. When you're dead, they react in a manner that it just drives them apart. But the normal reactions between DNA and proteins are the wrong ones and act with time and chance to disrupt the living systems. There's something to life that we have no idea. The Bible says that by Jesus all things consist. He's holding us together. And laminin, you can check this out on the internet. Laminin, that's the cell adhesion molecule. It looks like a cross. Interesting. And there's a whirlpool galaxy up there too. You look at that and it's shaped like a cross. And this guy, Thomas Chalmers, he's the former president of the University of Wisconsin and the first head of the geology department at the University of Chicago. He warned researchers not to let any hypothesis dominate their thinking. Instead, they should always seek to have multiple working hypotheses. He says because it helps to sharpen our analytical skills, because if we don't do that, we'll simply memorize and conform. Okay? You should have conflicting ideas so you can think about it. The challenge we have in government education is there's only one idea that's presented. Just one. So instead of thinking, you're memorizing and you're conforming. What we did tonight is we want you to think. And you can't think until you see both sides. So we're giving you the freedom to think. In your science class, you have the freedom to memorize. Okay, there's two ways of looking at it, and it's important. I mean, as far as graduate, how many are evolutionists? Raise your hand. All right. Are you a graduated evolutionist like Darwin, or are you a punctuated equilibriumist like Hawkins? Which one? One thought we'd find a whole bunch of transitional fossils. They didn't find any. So then they said, well, maybe it happened in jumps. So basically the theory says, if we find the fossils, it's true, and if we don't find the fossils, it's true. Everybody has a belief system. And there's denominations inside the evolutionist camp. Okay, and this is a famous evolutionist, Thomas Nagel. He was an evolutionist for a long time, and he wrote this book, Mind and Cosmos, why the materialist neo-Darwin conception of nature is almost certainly true? No, false. This is an evolutionist saying that Darwinian evolution is false from your own camp. He's saying it doesn't work. What did they say? Hey, let's discuss this. Should we do that? That's not what they did to him. It says, what's gotten into Thomas Nagel, leading atheist branded a heretic for daring to question evolution. But I think he was right on a couple of his comments. All he did was argue in a new book that evolutionary view of nature is false, and now the grand forces have descended upon him. You don't bow down to that evolutionary dogma. There's academic and employment persecution that's going to follow. And that's what's happening to him. Like I said, he argued most Darwinists offer a dogmatic system of thought that is intoxicating precisely because it offers the illusion of freeness from religion. How many people believe in evolution because they don't want to believe in God? They don't want to believe the alternative. This is what the evolutionist is saying. He's from your own camp. I realize that such doubts will strike many people as outrageous, but that is because almost everyone in our secular culture has been browbeaten into regarding the reductive research program about the origin of life as sacrosanct, on the ground that anything else would not be science. This is an evolutionist talking. He's saying it doesn't work. And now all his friends are calling him crazy. But I'm just asking you to start thinking. There's thing, Mr. Pinker, scientist at MIT, called A Mind of Science, that's the book, The Shoddy Reasoning of a Once Great Thinker. You know what I think? I think he's finally thinking. He stopped memorizing and conforming. He's looking at both sides of the argument, and evolution is clearly false, and he's got the guts to put it in a book. And all his friends have turned on him. They didn't ask him, why do you think that? Let's reason together. Let's use our logic. They didn't do that. They turned on him. But if you can't win the battle in the science room, you got to censor it. And that's what they're doing in the United Kingdom. Okay, natural biological processes are said to be sufficient to account for the history, diversity, and complexity of life on Earth. The Department for Education goes on to assert that there can be no evidence-based theory that can challenge this principle. You can't even bring up evidence that contradicts it. Okay, they want you to believe in evolution. You can't talk about creation. We're going to tell you what to think and not how to think. And this is what H.S. Lipson said, University of Manchester. Evolution became, in a sense, a science. Now this isn't evolutionists talking. This isn't me. This is his words. Evolution became, in a sense, a scientific religion. Almost all scientists have accepted it, and many are prepared to bend their observations to fit with it. To my mind, the theory does not stand up at all. If living matter is not then caused by internal play of atoms, forces, and radiation, how has it come to be? Well, the only acceptable explanation is creation. All right. You had mentioned human fossils. Does anybody think of other fossils? What's another great example of evolution? Can anybody think of any? Yes, sir.
Wolf to dogs.
Wolf to dogs? Well, I go along with that. That's the same kind of animal. Can anybody think of something else? Because I was talking to a student here one time, and he said the evolution of the whale. That was his best example. Do you guys believe the evolution of the whale is valid? Yes or no?
Yes.
You do? Okay, well, let's take a look at the evolution of the whale. It's in the science books. This one right here is Rhodocetus, okay? Let's just see what happened with Rhodocetus. Okay, now this, Carl Werner, the guy who tried to prove evolution true but didn't, this is what he says. Okay, the evidence offered for evolution of whales from land animals is embarrassing for the entire field of science. Scientists have added a whale's tail to an animal when none has been found. How many think, who would do that? Do you think scientists would do that? Add a tail and they haven't found it? Okay. They've added flippers to the same animal when they've not been found. They've ignored contradictory evidence in the fossil layer and called animals walking whales. Do you think, now this is a creationist who's writing this. Who believes the creationist? That a scientist would actually add something when there's no evidence for it? You guys think a scientist would? Who thinks a scientist would never do that? There's too much integrity. Okay, what?
Happens all the time.
Isn't that sad?
When this video series was being filmed on location at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, the executive producer noticed a discrepancy between museum drawings of Rhodocetus and the fossils. The reconstruction of Rhodocetus had a whale fluke, but there were no fossils of the tail to confirm this. Dr. Phil Gingrich, the scientist responsible for the discovery and reconstruction of Rhodocetus, was questioned how he knew there was a whale fluke on Rhodocetus, since that part of the fossil was missing.
What was the reasoning that the scientists think there was a fluke on Rhodocetus based on the other pieces of anatomy?
Well, I told you we don't have the tail in Rhodocetus, so we don't know for sure whether it had a ball vertebra indicating a fluke or not. So I speculated it might have had a fluke.
Scientist Gingrich also acknowledged that the flippers were drawn on the diagram without these fossils. Now, he does not believe this animal had flippers. Again, his answer was surprising, since the museum diagrams had flippers on Rhodocetus.
Now, since then, we've found the forelimbs, the hands, and the front arm, the arms, in other words, of Rhodocetus. And we understand that it doesn't have the kind of arms that can be spread out like flippers are on a whale. And if you don't have flippers, I don't think you can have a fluke tail and really powered swimming. And so I now doubt that Rhodocetus would have had a fluke tail.
Many experts consider whales to be the best fossil evidence for evolution, but are unaware of these discrepancies. Scientists who oppose evolution suggest that changing one animal into another by accidental mutations is preposterous. If a carnivorous land mammal, such as a hyena, evolved into a whale, too many body transitions would have to occur by chance. The hyena's front legs would have to change into pectoral fins. Its back legs would have to disappear. Its nostrils would have to move to the top of its head and form a blowhole. The hyena would have to develop a dorsal fin by accident. Its bony tail would have to change into a cartilaginous fluke. The hyena's hair would have to nearly disappear and be replaced by blubber. Its body would have to increase to 80,000 pounds, and its external ears would have to disappear and change for high-pressure diving. Each of these new traits would require at least one new structural protein. Each protein would in turn necessitate adding 300 letters of DNA to the genetic blueprint in the proper sequence.
One new structural protein, and it goes on to say how that cannot happen. There's just no way. It's like rolling a bunch of dice and it comes up 3 for thousands of times. I mean, you can believe that if you want, but don't call it science. Get that stuff out of the textbooks. And that's not the only stuff that's in the textbooks. Now, what I liked about this, and this is UCal Berkeley, okay? It says, now they give a chart, okay? It looks like the whale chart, evolution. But notice that these lines do not connect to each other, okay? In the science book, they do. This is the, Pecasitas is their ancestors to each one in the textbooks. But here at UCal Berkeley, look what it says. It says, none of the individual animals on the evogram is the direct ancestor of any other. Basically, they're just saying what the Bible says. The Bible says everything produces after their kind. It's not a creation tree, an evolution tree. It's a creation orchard. God made kinds when they had enough genetic information for the wolf to turn into the dog, the coyote, and the wolf. You know, the zebra could be the horse and the donkey. There's enough genetic information in here. And then there was a flood, and there was the bottleneck, and there was still enough diversity there. And that's what we see. Everything, we won't go out those doors, everything produces after their kind. The only time that we think something produces other than their kind is in our imagination. That's when we think that we're all related to bananas and monkeys and everything else from that single living cell. And they asked Richard Dawkins, say, what mechanism adds information to your genome? And he paused for about 20 seconds and he said, turn off the tape. There's no known information, there's no known way to change one animal into another. There's not a scientific paper on the planet that shows that. There's not a scientific paper on the planet that shows life from non-life. So open your minds a bit to creation. All right? And so if people, if there's so much evidence and the scientists are saying, well, I don't believe it, why do people believe it? Well, evolutionists have three tools. One is fraud. The other one is, fraud, ridicule. If you don't believe it, they'll ridicule you. And if you continue to do it, there's academic and employment persecution. And that's what we see with Haeckel's drawings. Haeckel said, that, see, this is evolution. We're all going through our evolutionary phases with the reptilial and the fish and all that stuff. But what he forged were those drawings. These are fake drawings. And nobody had a microscope to check it out. And this is what they say. They said, this is the worst case of scientific fraud, deliberately misleading. These are fakes. See, Haeckel, Ernest Haeckel, he loved Darwinian theory. He said, boy, that'd be great if only there was an evidence. 10 years go by, no evidence, I better make some. And he made a lot of people doubt God and believe in evolution. And the thing of it is, 120 some years later, it's still in the textbooks. Okay, let's get them out of there. I go through your biology books, they don't have the pictures, but they do the same with the words. They say a scientist can't tell them apart. Let's get that idea out of there. That's bad misinformation. How about Piltdown Man? Founded in 1908, and it was in the museum for 40 years. It was the skull of it was a human skull and the ape of a jive. But it was in there for 40 years. It's at the museum. They won't let anybody look at it. And after 40 years, and it's in the textbook, see, this is the proof for evolution. After 40 years, it's like, no, it doesn't make sense. It's a fraud. That was Piltdown Man. So Piltdown Man, the greatest hoax in the history of science. No, wait a minute. I thought that was Haeckel's drawing. A lot of hoaxes. It's the hall of shame, really. Anybody ever seen this picture come about the Scopes monkey trial? They want a transitional fossil. Nebraska Man. You know what they made that out of? You got to have a lot of evidence to make not only him and his wife and his tools. It was a pig. Pig's tooth. They made it all out of that. So William Jennings Bryan was confronted with a battery of great scientific experts who stunned him with the facts of Nebraska Man, the tooth. The facts of Nebraska Man. Who are we to question the scientists? I'm saying question the scientists. Question them a lot. Okay, so who is he to question the world's greatest scientists? Would they lie? Well, people lost a lot of faith in the scientists when a pig could be turned into a man based on one tooth. The authorities who also ridiculed Mr. Bryan for his supposed ignorance created an entire race of humanity out of the tooth of a pig. Ramphithecus. This is what they found, that's what they drew. There's a lot of assumptions there. Okay, here's a test. Which one's human? Right there. Okay? The human foot is like nothing ever on earth. We're made to walk upright. A chimp is made to grab, an ape is made to grab a tree. Okay? There's nothing like the human foot. And that's what the evolution, or in the Smithsonian. Look at Lucy here, Australopithecus afarensis. She's walking in that Laetoli tract. Those Laetoli tracts are supposed to be millions of years old, and they need a human foot to put in it, right? Millions of years old. But if it looks like a human foot, why not just think a human made it? Well, no, humans weren't around back then. Well, how do you know? Maybe that's not 3 million years old, or millions of years old. And that's what your science textbook says. You know, Australopithecus afarensis, nearly complete skeleton, keep that in mind. A 3.2 million year old skeleton was discovered, and it most definitely walked upright. They definitely walked upright. See those footprints? Okay? How many people think that Lucy most definitely walked upright? That's what the scientists say. That's what's in the books. Okay, and this is what they found. This is your nearly complete skeleton. Nearly complete. Does that look nearly complete? How many feet bones? How many finger bones? How many hand bones? They could have made either one of them things based on what they believe. That's what you see in the museum. They took a chimp skull and put it on a human body. Look at those fingers. They could play the piano. Look at those toes. Notice how she models, puts that toe out there, extends the leg. Notice the contemplative, she's thinking. Notice the whites in the eye. Look at your monkey card. There's no whites in her eyes, in a chimp's eyes. Why do they have that for her? Why do they have fingers like that? And they say, well, they found some of her relatives, the same species, then they found the finger bones, and they did. And guess what? They're curved like a chimp. Our bones are straight, you know. Chimp bones are curved. They grab stuff. And so are their feet. And they found the feet bones too, and those are curved. Notice the chimp skull. There's no nose bone. They can't wear glasses very well. Notice the angle on it. It's very sloped. The human one is straight, and it has nose bones. Okay, so it's a chimp skull. But if I told you what they did, I'll just show it. I won't even say anything here.
From Nova, PBS Nova. This is not a Christian television program. This program is being used in the schools to indoctrinate the children in evolution. Let's take a look at what they have to say. In Search of Human Origins with Don Johansson.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost.
You caught that, right? The perfect fit shows her hips to curve like a chimp, but that's an illusion. Why? Because you don't sell t-shirts or get TV time by finding monkey bones. You got to find an evolutionary ancestor to make the big leagues, brother. We have hope. Now, if I told you what they did, you would not believe me. You would not believe me. I want to show you what they did in order to change these chimpanzee hips into human hips, and Lucy become our ancestor.
Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster. He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
I hope so. If you use a Dremel and cut out the stuff that you don't like, it better look like you want it to.
What they're doing, I mean, how many people think she walked up right now? They're cutting her hip and they're twisting it. They're changing the facts, the data, to fit the theory instead of changing the theory to fit the facts. And this book says, the embryos of all vertebrates today share certain developmental features suggesting a common ancestry. Well, it could just as easily suggest a common designer, couldn't it? But they won't allow creation in the door. They won't allow a designer in the door. Okay? And who saw that debate between Bill Nye and Ken Ham? All right? Bill Nye's altar call. It's the evolutionist altar call. We have to teach evolution or we're going to fall behind this other countries as far as inventors and scientists. Okay? Well, how far did we fall behind the other countries when we invented the MRI?
Hi, my name is Dr. Raymond Damadian. I am a young Earth creation scientist and believe that God created the world in 6 24-hour days, just as recorded in the book of Genesis. By God's grace and the devoted prayers of my godly mother-in-law, I invented the MRI scanner in 1969. The idea that scientists who believe the Earth is 6,000 years old cannot do real science is simply wrong.
Simply wrong. Bill Nye is wrong. You don't need evolution to do anything. It's a belief system about the past. When a heart surgeon's doing surgery, he doesn't care how it got there. He's got to know what it's doing. You know, when we send a man to the moon, we need to know how to get the man there and back. We don't need to know where the moon came from. Evolution has nothing to do with science. And yet he had the persecution too. He's got the very first patent on the MRI. The very first. Did he get the Nobel Peace Prize? No. They could have gave it to 3 people. They gave it to 2 people. And he wasn't one of them. And he had to go through lawsuits. And basically a patent is just a license, piece of paper that says you can sue somebody and possibly win. And so he sued Johnson & Johnson. He won the verdict, but the judge overturned it. Okay? And then he sued another one GE, I think, and he won that one, got $29 million. All right? And he put it all back in the company. He didn't get his shareholders. He didn't take it. He wanted to make sure of that. And when you look at the who's who of science, it's creationists. See, science won't work if everything's chance random processes. Why do we have a uniformity of nature? Science depends on that. In a chance random universe, I mean, why does gravity work today and not, I mean, in a chance random universe, you know, why would they work all the time? See, the Bible can make sense of that. Okay, and this one, Dr. Gonzalez, he's from Iowa State. You needed, what did it say, approximately 15 papers of good quality you needed to have 15 peer-reviewed journals published around there to get tenure. He had 68. Is he qualified? He's overqualified. He's been cited 15,000 times. He had discovered 2 planets. And he wrote this book called Privileged Planet, which basically said the world's in the perfect place. It's almost like it's here for a purpose. And they didn't like that on campus. So the ACLU started to make a stink, and other people, the faculty, they signed a bunch of stuff. They don't want intelligent design on that campus. They don't want you to think, or their students to think. They want them to memorize and conform. And so did he get tenured? They got him kicked out of there, tenure denied, which is like the kiss of death. And I've talked to creation scientists at the Creation Museum. I've talked to three of them. And I asked them, what advice would you give to somebody in college? And he says, don't tell anybody. I said, why is that? Because they may not get their degree. They may not get into grad school. They may not get tenure. See, there's academic and employment persecution if you don't bow down to the evolutionary dogma. And that's what it is. You gotta bow, it's dogma. You don't question it, or your life's or your job's on the line. They find C14 in dinosaurs. Your science book says C14 is only good for 50,000 years. And these guys did it at the Geophysics Symposium in Singapore, and the C14 gave dates of 22,000 to 39,000 at a scientific symposium. This is where you should discuss the findings, okay? What did they do? Well, they couldn't think of a rescuing device to explain that, so they just censored it. The abstract was removed from the conference website by 2 chairmen because they could not accept the findings. Unwilling to challenge the data openly, they erased it from the public view. So if you want to find out about this, you got to go on the internet. They aren't going to show you this in your classroom. This is being censored. Go into carbon-14 dating, decontaminated dinosaur bones on YouTube. And right there, those are the dates of the dinosaurs. All right? And they go through how they found them, where they found them, how they tested it. And this is the letter that they got. There was obviously an error in the data. Why is that? Because they believe dinosaurs lived 65 million years ago. That's the only error. You change the date on that. And we're going to do a talk at our church come Sunday where we're going to dive into this. You're going to hear Mary Schweitzer in her own words. All of the chemistry and all of the breakdown experiments, everything we know about science says it shouldn't be there. That's why she had to do the experiment 17 times. Couldn't believe her eyes 17 times. But instead of changing the age of that geologic column, which is the Bible of the evolutionist, they changed the laws of science. They're hoping that it's biofilm and it's not. Just go into dinosaur soft tissue. The very first thing that pops up will be rsr.org, Real Science Radio. And they have the most comprehensive list of soft dinosaur tissue on the internet, and secularists say that. And if you also want to, they also pop to the very top on any search engine, type in Big Bang predictions. It'll pop to the top, except it's predictions that didn't happen, bad predictions. Okay, so anyhow, this University of Georgia, they're the ones who carbon dated the bones. They censored it. This guy here, Mark Armitage, he found bone cells in a T-Rex, Triceratops horn. And he just published it in a scientific journal. There's a bone cell. He didn't say anything, and everybody knows bone cells can't last millions of years. Did excellent work. Nobody else had ever found that. Did he get an attaboy and a promotion, get a raise? 2 weeks after it was published, he was fired. There's academic and employment persecution going on if you don't believe the theory of evolution. That's what happened to Dean Kenny. Google search him. He wrote a textbook for colleges, Chemical Predestination. Okay? And he believed in evolution. And then some young earth creationists, they were talking, are we going to learn about creation? He says, no, that's a fairy tale. Oh yeah, well what about these books? What do you say about that? And he read the books and he couldn't review them. And he became a creationist. And he got fired. He was tenured, so he got his job back. But just read about it. Slaughter the dissidents. It happened to Jerry Bergman, and it's happening all over. This is the third volume of this. You better bow down to evolution, or your career's in trouble. And this is what an evolutionist wrote. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, and in spite of the tolerance of scientific community for unsubstantiated just so stories are you came from a living cell. You know, we talked about in the patent absurdity. You look at a cell and you think that's not designed. That's absurd. Okay, commitment to materialism, no matter how counterintuitive, it's counterintuitive that cell got put together. It's profoundly counterintuitive. Okay, no matter how profoundly, how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying the uninitiated, moreover, the materialism is absolute. We cannot allow a divine foot in the door. See, they have a preconceived condition, and they won't allow it. But I'm saying, let's talk about it. Let's just talk about it in the classroom. Let's not censor one idea. Let's get all the ideas on the table and talk about them scientifically. And that's what Bill Nye and Ken Dam did. Who saw that? Okay, we rented the room over at Stewart Hall, at Centennial, and we packed it. Yeah. See, people are interested in this. This is the battle of the day. And I'd really like you to listen to this one, Randy Galuzzo, Engaging the Evolutionists. I've listened to this probably 20 times. I encourage you to go into this. Just type in Engaging the Evolutionist and watch it on YouTube. And I really like the way he closes. See, there's freedom found in creation. What's this freedom? The freedom to follow the evidence wherever it goes, which allows the researcher to never stop questioning and discovering. There's freedom in that. Did Mark Armitage have the freedom to do that? No, he didn't. No, he didn't. Because this is what Todd, a professor at Kansas State, said. Even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic. It's like all the data points to a creator. You know? It'd be like if I was a doctor and he came and it's like, well, you know, all the data points to like you have cancer, but I don't think so. I think I'm going to give you a flu shot. We won't put up with that. But that's what's happening here. Okay, the freedom found in creation science. From the freedom from magic words, like we talked about. Magic words. Arose, emerge, appeared, give rise to a miracle of evolution. You know, real scientists do not use these magic words and fuzzy words to describe the origin of things. This building did not just arise. It was put together, you know. Now, how'd you like to try this new medication? It just burst on the scene. That's not how science works. But yet, this doctor, he says, when he reads a peer-reviewed journal, these words come off the page like water off of Niagara Falls. Real scientists don't use that. When I'm talking observation and testing, they don't use words like that. When you're talking a belief system and faith, you use words like that. And then also the freedom from the self-delusion that researchers must conclude that intricate designs are only an illusion. It's like when we look at a cell and we say that's not designed, and that's what is deluded. And Richard Dawkins says biology is the study of complicated things that have the appearance of being designed for a purpose. The appearance of being designed. Why can't it just be designed? Why can't it just be designed? How about Francis Crick? Biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see is not designed, but rather evolved. You have to brainwash yourself and hit your head against the wall. This evolved, this couldn't be created. And you look at those cells, the complexity of that, it's obvious it was designed. And there's no way that's going to come together by chance random processes. You saw those miniature motors. You saw that stuff. Okay? The freedom also from the blinding and smothering presuppositions that expects regular errors and mistakes in nature due to millions of years of evolution. That's what they thought of DNA. They didn't know what it did. Oh, it must be junk left over from the evolution. And now it's not. It's gold. There's no junk. The creationist scientists at the time said, hey, wait a minute. Let's just wait. We don't know if it's junk or not. It's probably designed for a purpose, and they were right. Okay, the freedom from many religious conclusions masquerading as science made by evolutionists. These are statements like this. Carl Sagan says the cosmos is all it is, all there ever was, or all there ever will be. And you don't have to get into an argument. You can just say, if he was still alive, Dr. Sagan, what scientific experiment did you do to prove that? And what paper did you publish it in? He couldn't have, because the experiment would still be going on. Just ask for the scientific journal and read about it. Stephen Hawking, he says, the world-renowned theoretical physicist finds no room for heaven in his version of the cosmos. The 69-year-old says there is no heaven or afterlife for broken-down computers. That's what he calls our mind. That's a fairy tale for people afraid of the dark. And John Lennox says, he says evolution is a fairy tale for people afraid of the light. That's pretty profound. This is Lawrence Krauss. The amazing thing that every atom in your body came from a star that exploded, and the atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star from your right hand, and that is really the most poetic thing that I know about physics. You're all stardust. And he goes on to say that. Excuse me, what scientific paper did you publish that in to make that statement? See, these are religious statements about the past. They are not statements of science. I'm talking observation and testing. How about this guy? We no longer feel ourselves to be guests in someone else's home and therefore obligated to make our behavior conform to a set of pre-existing cosmic rules. It is now our creation. We must make the rules. When we make the rules, we establish the perimeters of reality. We create the world, and because we do, we no longer feel beholden to outside forces. We no longer have to justify our behavior. Remember that phrase. Okay, we no longer have to justify our behavior, for we are now the architects of the universe. We are responsible to nothing outside ourselves. We are the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. Who do you think took this to the extreme? How about Jeffrey Dahmer? Serial killer. Cannibal. If a person doesn't think there's a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway. I always believed the theory of evolution is truth. That we all just came from slime. Then when we die, that was it. There's nothing. He took it to the logical extreme. Why bother if there's no God? Evolution says there's no God. If there's no God, there's no God-given rights. That's why we broke away from Britain. Remember, we were endowed by our Creator. Our founding fathers were Creator. They were creationists. And we were endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, if there's evolution is true, there's no God. There's no God-given rights. So where do we get our rights? From the government. And that's a scary thought. All right, this guy too, he had made a bomb. A social Darwinist leads to mass murder. He had killed 69 people, and he had hundreds of footnotes of Darwin. And the new government in Norway, based on eugenics, watch out for that word. When they start changing sanctity of life to quality of life, look out. And this put it pretty safe. The Darwinian evolution, it's more the destruction of the unfit than the survival of the fit. And which culture do you think swallowed this one, hook, line, and sinker? Germany. Germany killed 11 million people and didn't break one law. They just defined people as non-persons and then killed them by the millions. And they say, well, they were Catholics or they were Christian. You know what they did? They changed the 10 commandments into 12 commandments. They took out don't kill, don't covet, don't steal, because they were doing that all over Europe. And they replaced them with keep your bloodline pure, honor your Führer. Do the research on that. Beliefs have consequences. Okay? And this is what he says. Hitler also accepted Charles Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest and asserted that every man had a right to be as cruel as nature. Detailed lectures were given in schools to SS troops to prove the inferiority of the Jews. And then it says, therefore it was not a crime to exterminate them since they do not belong to humanity at all. And also Adolf Hitler created new laws that would remove the Jews from their status as persons. And the SS were then free to kill them without breaking laws, and they were free to exterminate them without committing murder. There would be no trials for poisoning vermin. Beliefs have consequences. Okay, I talk to people, how do you determine right or wrong? Well, the person does. Okay, what's wrong with what Dahmer did? Well, and society does. Okay, what's wrong with what Germany did? No, there are absolutes. People say there are no absolutes to me, and I say, well, are you absolutely sure? And if they say yes, well, that's an absolute. Or they'll say there is no truth, and I say, is that true? Well, if it is, well, then it's self-refuting. Or they'll say, we can only believe what we can, with our five senses, we can only believe that. Well, which one of your five senses told you that? Did you taste it? Did you smell it? Did you see it? A lot of the logic doesn't add up. So again, beliefs have consequences. And today we're killing people by the millions because they're non-persons. The Supreme Court said that they're non-persons. Who are we killing? We killed probably 3,000 or 4,000 today. You know, in the World War for Independence, there's about 4,000 or 5,000 people killed total. And we're doing that in 2 days. What are we killing? The Supreme Court said, and remember, the Supreme Court said that black people were non-persons 100 years ago. The Supreme Court can be wrong, and it's wrong today. What are we killing every day by the thousands? Anybody want to take a guess?
The unborn.
The unborn, that's right. They don't have a choice. Yeah, and for all choice, yeah, well, who should decide? Well, let's let the baby decide. Everyone that's had abortion, they've been born. Let's have the babies. Now, if you've had one of them, God can forgive you. You know? Get on. And so what are you going to be? Are you going to follow lockstep into evolution? Follow the crowd? Look at all those people. Hail Hitler, Hail Hitler. Look at that guy. I think he's thinking. In this culture, it's hard to stand against the tide. But that's what I'm encouraging you to do. See both sides of this. You ain't going to see it in your classroom. They ain't going to allow it. Hear no creation, see no creation, speak no creator. My brother-in-law went to college here. He was hydrology major, had a geology class. They took a whole week trying to figure out how Grand Canyon formed. And none of the theories worked. And at the end, the professor said, there is one theory we haven't talked about. Does anybody know what it is? It says, Noah's flood. And it got really quiet in the room. And the professor said, yeah, but we can't talk about it. And then they moved on. So much for following the evidence wherever it goes. All right? There's creationist scientists. They accurately predicted the magnetic field of Uranus and Neptune based on a 6,000-year model. Russell Humphreys, check it out on Google. 1984, he predicted it, and he was right. Based on the evolutionists were shocked. They also predicted what it would be on Mercury, and he was right. Evolutionists said, no, that's too small, shouldn't have one. But since it's been here millions of years, it's probably constant. And Russell said, no, it's going to decline. And he was right. This magnetic field on Earth has a magnetic half-life of 1,400 years, which means 1,400 years from now it's going to be half as strong, and 28 years from now it's going to be a fourth as strong. That means 1,400 years ago it was twice as strong. 2,800 years ago it was 4 times as strong. You can only do that so long before you either you disintegrate the Earth, or turn it into a neutron star, or what else have I heard is too hot for life, or it rips the iron out of your bones. See, the Earth shouldn't have a magnetic field if it's billions of years old. But they say there's a dynamo that charges it up. Okay, well, what about Uranus? That has a magnetic field, and it's got no measurable internal heat. There's no power for the dynamo. And Pluto, we're getting the information back from that. It's losing nitrogen at 500 tons an hour, same rate as Mars. It should have been gone eons ago. There's a lot of evidence for young solar system, young universe, young Earth. We have comets. Where do they come from? The Oort cloud, because they can't last millions of years. They have to be made somewhere else. We have no evidence for the Oort cloud. And if you are interested in that sort of thing, let's see. Here's a book called In the Beginning by Walt Brown. Nobody talks about it. The creation's places don't talk. RSR.org talks about it. He's made accurate predictions. He predicted what was going to be in a comet. He said olivine, because that's from in the Earth, and he was right. He predicted that asteroids would be floating rock piles, and he was right. And he shows how the meteorites have these cauldrons in them. It's melted rock. I don't have time to go into it, but just search hydroplate theory, radioactivity on YouTube, and you'll see Brian Nichol explaining where meteorites came from inside the Earth. All right? His assumption, he just has one assumption, that there was half the ocean. Oh boy, I better wrap up. You're going to have to learn that on yourself. Okay, but everything is just a click away, and I encourage you to check some of these sites out. Don't be like, I could have told Grant, now you're too young, get back in outfield. Give it a chance and see how it does. Go into Answers in Genesis and look at Gary Parker's talk. I challenge you. Just do 1 hour. Put 1 hour research into this and open up your mind, just a crack, and let creation seep in. Answers in Genesis, RSR is great. It's a radio talk show. They have great guests. Go into the rsr.org and type in Walt Brown and learn about the hydroplate theory. It's incredible. Creation.com, ICR. All right. Okay, now we're back to this. Don't be absurd. Nobody made us. We evolved by chance from snowflakes. That's what they're going to teach in the school. I'm going to ask you to just question it. And I'm going to leave you, this is your lifelong homework, all right? When you see a butterfly, I want you to think about tonight. Did this butterfly evolve, or was it created? Because this butterfly lays the egg, and then it turns into a caterpillar. Then it goes into the chrysalis, and it dissolves itself. And it comes out a butterfly. It dissolves itself. It had to get all the way through the chrysalis, or it's dead. It had to get all the way through the chrysalis the first time, or it doesn't reproduce. For him to go into the chrysalis, he's betting his life he's going to get out on the other side. And evolution doesn't do that. Evolution doesn't do that. And when you see a butterfly, think about, oh, we're just going to show you them coming out of a chrysalis. It's kind of neat. So that caterpillar turned into something that can fly. How do you do that? Just slowly over mutations. Just hit the jackpot the very first time. That transformed into a crawling stomach, into something that can fly.
Generation by generation, waves of monarch butterflies will migrate.
But you can go onto that on YouTube. And basically the butterflies, they live about a month and a half to 2 months, these 4 generations. And then this Methuselah generation lives almost a year, 9 months. And why is that? Because they leave in March and they follow the milkweed. They lay the eggs on the milkweed, so that generation dies right there. The next generation goes up following the milkweed, and they die right there. The next generation goes up all the way to the top, and they lay the eggs, okay, and they die there. And those are the ones that hatch. They don't breed. They just eat like crazy. And then, are they going to freeze up in Canada and Minnesota? By golly, lucky stars, evolution would have it that they all fly back to Mexico, and they've never been there. They all fly back from Canada to Mexico. You're telling me that happened by chance, and they do that every year? They've never been there, and they all go to the same place? I don't have enough faith to believe that. And they cover the trees like crazy, all right? So to wrap this up real quickly, I'm encouraging you to search for the truth. Open your mind just a crack. Give evolution, give creation 1 hour, and listen to Gary Parker on Answers in Genesis. See how an evolutionist turned into a creationist. And I have you the courage to question. So when you see a word in your science book that says somehow the first living cell came about, you have to raise your hand, sir, what somehow, how'd somehow happen? Question. Question. So tonight we talked about who's your daddy physically. And Pastor Kakuza is going to talk about who's your daddy spiritually, because beliefs have consequences. And it does matter what you believe. Pastor Kakuza?
What Brian is telling you, it is worth investigating, okay? You may have never heard it before. I really want to encourage you to ask questions. This Sunday night, feel free to come out to our church. We're not after anything. We're not after your money. Nothing, okay? We just love for you to come. You're invited to come. What I did want to mention, though, just like you may have never heard this before, there may be some of you here tonight who have never heard what the Bible says about how you can be sure of living forever with God, all right? It's not religion, okay? People think, oh, he's going to tell me all the, and you're going to confuse it with a lot of what the religions teach, but that's not what the Bible teaches. See, the Bible tells us this, that yes, God created things, but he created man with a will, free will. Man made wrong choices. The Bible tells us sin entered the world and death through sin. And all the problems we have today come from that. But you know what? Right after it happened, God said, I'm going to provide for you a way back to me, a way to be reconciled with me. And that's really the story of the whole Bible. On Sunday nights, not this Sunday night because you'll be speaking, but on Sunday nights we've been covering, in a sense, a series on biblical history. And it's been fabulous to learn and to see what's all taken place. But let me share this with you, and I illustrate, and I know some of you have seen this before because you're familiar faces, but some of you may have not. I share this with you because this is what made sense to me. At 19, by the way. I was in secular college at the time. Okay, so if we could, just for the moment, pretend this is you and me. We're going to let my wallet represent the things we do wrong. Okay, the Bible calls the things we do wrong sin. It's what it is, okay? It doesn't mean that you necessarily go rob banks or murder people or rape or those kind of things. It simply means we miss the mark of God's perfection. We've broken the laws, so to speak, that God says, okay? Now look, here's the difference. Religion says this. Religion says, okay, the way you get to heaven is by doing a bunch of good things, and if you work hard and you turn over a new leaf, and behave yourself and all that, that'll get you to heaven. But no, God says the only way you pay for sin is by death. The wages of sin is death, which would be separation from God for all eternity. The Bible tells us that heaven is a perfect place. For us to go there, we have to have all of our sin gone. So how's that going to take place? Well, again, good works won't do it. Here's the truth, and this is the story of the Bible. This is the record that God gave of His Son. That's how the Bible puts it, okay? For God so loved you and me. He loves us. He hates our sin, but He loves us. Realizing there's nothing we could do to get back to where we can live with Him forever in heaven, He Himself took on flesh, God the Son. Okay, I like what one pastor said. God loved us so much that He would rather die than live without us. And that's exactly what Jesus did. He's God in the flesh. He came. God took on human flesh. He was born into the human race. He lived a perfect life. And He went to the cross. His name is Jesus. And when He died on the cross, you notice He had no sin of His own. Jesus died there for you and me. Okay? A lot of people look at the death of Christ and say, oh, it was a good thing. It went wrong. The mobs got Him. And no. Jesus said, you can't take my life. I lay it down myself. Okay? And this is what happened. Now watch what happened. This is the message of the Bible. God so loved us, He gave His only begotten Son. When Christ died on the cross, that is what He did in taking our sin upon Himself. Jesus Christ paid for all your sin, not only what you've done, but what you're going to do till the day you die. All of it. Because none of you are that old to be living back then. Okay, all of our sin was in the future. Jesus died for all of our sin. Paid the debt. And I think the greatest event in history, Jesus literally came back from the dead to prove He had conquered death. And only somebody who conquers death can offer life. Okay, now look. The Bible says this. Well, then how do you get to heaven? Not everybody's just going to heaven. There's something you have to do. To make this payment good on your behalf, you need to put your faith in Jesus Christ. Okay? When you trust Him as your Savior, the payment He made is good on your behalf. The Bible says this, be it known unto you, therefore, men and brethren, that through this man, Jesus, is preached unto you the forgiveness of sins. We need God's forgiveness. We've violated His laws. By the way, people who don't like that idea, that's many times where different ideas come up about, well, God can't be real. Let's figure this new thing out and all that, because they're trying to push them out of their mind. No. Be it known unto you, therefore, men and brethren, that through this man is preached unto you the forgiveness of sins, and by Him all that believe in Him, trust in Him as your Savior. All that believe are justified from all things from which you could not be justified by the law of Moses. When you put your faith in Jesus Christ and Him alone as your Savior, God gives you that moment, everlasting life. You become His child. You're guaranteed heaven. Now people say, well then, how does that affect life? Well, God would desire that we would respond to Him out of gratefulness and live a proper life, but living a proper life will not get you to heaven. That's works, and the Bible says, for by grace are you saved, through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. Ephesians 2:8-9. So yes, it's good to live good, but that won't take away the sin. The only thing that takes away the sin is when you trust Jesus Christ, that He made that payment for you. I shared that with you tonight. If you have any questions, please let me know, okay? It's the most amazing message in all the world. And you know, the results of it, there's many results of it. One of them is that you'll have peace with God. You'll have peace with God, okay? And another one is things start making sense. Before I trusted Christ as my Savior, I was in college. All right, I was an evolutionist. Why not? I mean, that's what I was taught. That's what I believe. And then once I trusted Christ, though, then I started understanding, hey, you know what? This thing about creation, I'm going to look into this thing about creation a little bit more. And as I did, it started making so much more sense as far as how it all fits together. So like Brian said, think. Okay, let's think. Give God's Word a chance. Give these truths a chance. And especially give Jesus Christ a chance. I urge you to trust Him as your Savior, okay? I'd love for you to do that.